Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the Engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Art Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.
Hey, this is Tyler Jones, and you're listening to the Element Podcast. What's happening on my woods, people? KC's over here being the co-pilot again. He hates driving, but he's got him a big old jug of water, and I hope you enjoyed that refreshing little that he gave us. But what's been going on, dude?
Just sweating a little bit. It's already getting that hot time of year, man.
It's 106.
106 in your truck right now.
Yeah.
I don't think it's quite that hot, but I mean, I think summer is here, which we have been super blessed through the spring to have a very mild spring, for us at least. I know a lot of our friends to the north really had kind of a tough spring because they didn't really have spring. It was all winter. I don't remember who it was. Somebody the other day said, like, it's not spring, it's just January 118th or something like that.
That's about right.
Yeah, so pretty funny.
It's been nice for us. So, like, you can't, for me, if I'm wearing a hoodie and I'm comfortable, that's like the best day. I just love being able to have a hoodie on, you know, because you can take it off and work and still not go crazy sweating, you know.
Yeah.
I just love that.
I don't really like sleeve cuffs, so hoodies get on. Well, we talked about this, maybe the last podcast or something, but you're less hairy than I am. The hair on my arms gets to feeling real weird whenever I...
Is that why you wear wife beaters all the time?
Yeah, that's it,
when you're not on camera?
Yeah, and cut off blue jean shorts, you know, that kind of thing. But no, that's just my work attire.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So we got a lot to talk about right now. We're going to try to talk about it fast because coming up right after this introduction is an interview we did with Mr. Lindsay Thomas Jr. of the QDMA. And, dude, how long could we have talked to that guy?
Man, Lindsay Thomas Jr. is a smart fellow who has learned a ton in his life. And when you combine those two things together, you just have somebody who is like a person who knows. He's like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like,
a guru.
Yeah, a guru. That's it. Good guru. Boom. That's a good one. Yeah, he is a guru about the subject that we're going to talk about. And we talked to him a lot about trees and mast and different types of trees to both target, like on public land, if you're looking for trees that you're going to be using and preferring, and then also like what to plant on your own properties.
Right.
You know, if you have a place that kind of needs some extra mast or some extra cover and things like that, you know, what to plant there and how to go about those things.
Yeah, and then also if you're looking to get tree with it right now in the spring, we talked about scouting as well. So like spring and summer scouting of these trees that play into your laid plans for the fall.
Mm-hmm. And we also talk about pawpaws. So if you don't know what a pawpaw is, listen to this podcast.
And if you think you know what a pawpaw is, you don't.
You just might not.
It ain't the pawpaw that I thought it was.
Yeah, for sure. But it was a really good interview that I learned a ton. And quite honestly, I can't wait to go back and listen to our own review. I don't do that a ton, but this one I for sure am going to.
Yeah, me too, for sure. I mean, I listen to all the guests. If it's us talking.
Yeah, if it's us, no, probably not.
No. But if you haven't heard yet, we have recently released our newest film, Rock Trolls. And there's a couple of things for me to say about this. A, I'm very proud of this film. Put a lot of hard work into it. And I know you did too, because just getting down there and back up with all the camera equipment, especially you carried, was difficult. But this was just a trip of a lifetime. It's one of those trips you're not sure if you'll ever go back and do it, but watching it lately, I'm like, I have to go do it again.
I know. I felt the same way, man. And I was like, what I was thinking, I was like, okay, I've got to stay in good shape like for a long time so that I can go back with my kids. You know what I mean? Like,
I thought the same thing.
I think that would be awesome. And you have such a better head start on that than I do. So
you're going to stay in shape.
I might have to go back with y'all. Yeah, I got to stay in shape a lot longer than you do.
I'll start eating DQ about 8 years before you probably.
Man, yeah. But just an epic trip, like a once in a lifetime. Hopefully we can make it twice in a lifetime.
That's right, man. And so if you haven't seen it, it's all over our social media right now, but go watch it. And we would appreciate that a lot. And one other thing I've been thinking about is like, this is kind of like this is maybe like our first like really like big film, like long and something that you and I did together.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it wasn't before we met or whatever. I mean, we've had a couple of like decent little film releases, you know, One Eye Jack and stuff like that. This is going to be the first one that releases that's kind of a big project that we spent a lot of time working on and planning for, and then also in the post process as well. So if you can't tell, I'm really excited about it. So on that note, we decided just recently, as in like 4 or 5 minutes ago, that we would do a giveaway for one of our Element t-shirts that everybody thinks are so cool and we don't give away online very often. So if you go watch Rock Trolls and you give us a cool comment, we're going to X out all the ones that are like, you look like a doofus or something like that. We're not going to count those. But if you give us a comment on Rock Trolls like, way to go, guys, this is awesome, or, man, that one fish that Tyler caught just absolutely looks way bigger than the one KC caught.
It's probably true.
It's not.
Because I hold the camera closer than Tyler does.
That's right. But if you say something cool in a comment on our YouTube channel for that video, you will go into a drawing that we will do fairly and maybe even live, just so that we can prove that it's fairly done, for one of those t-shirts. And then we'll also give away a second t-shirt for all of our subscribers. They'll be in the pool for one t-shirt. So I think there's like 150 something subscribers right now, which is not very many. And we would like to have more. So if you don't subscribe to us on YouTube already, subscribe. If you have a Gmail account, you basically have a YouTube account. All you got to do is go in and subscribe. So make sure you do that. You'll be in the pool and have decent odds, about like drawing a Gila tag in New Mexico, which I did one time and didn't go on the trip. So, do that. Anything else?
No, man, I think that's about it. I think I'm ready to get to this Lindsay Thomas interview that way that we can get it over with and I can listen to it.
That's right. Let's do it. All right, so now on the phone we have Lindsay Thomas Jr. with the QDMA. What's happening, man?
Not much, Tyler. How are you guys this afternoon?
We're doing great. It's beautiful weather, about 90 degrees, so it's getting summertime a little bit.
I know it is coming on fast.
Yeah.
We're not quite to 90 yet here in Georgia, but it won't be long.
Yeah, where at in Georgia specifically?
We are in Athens. That's where QDMA's national headquarters is. That's home of the University of Georgia, just east of Atlanta, so we're kind of in the northern half of the state.
All right, so you're a Bulldog fan or what?
Oh, yeah, go Dogs.
Man, there was a close call last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a heartbreaker, but I was just proud to see us stand on that field with Alabama and show them that we were there.
For sure, man. Had a good team last year. So how's everything going this spring?
Going good.
Yeah.
Got some fishing in, got some turkey hunting in. Been busy here at QDMA, so we got a lot of good things going on here. So, been a good spring.
Yeah. What kind of fishing?
Done a little bit of bass fishing. Was fishing this past weekend down in southeast Georgia for redbreast sunfish, which is a brim basically, a stream fish. And where I'm from in southeast Georgia, we've got the true blackwater streams, which are, kind of clear water, but it's tea colored or it looks black. And I just love fishing those streams like that and catching the redbreasts out of there. You can catch a lot of different species, but that's what I was doing this past weekend. They usually bite right now in May when the water level's right, and they are right now.
Man, that sounds like fun. Do you keep them and eat them?
I do sometimes. I don't always. I mean, it's hard. They're such a pretty fish when you catch them out of that clear water. it's almost breaks your heart to eat them, but they are delicious too. So it's which side of the fence you're going to come down on. Sometimes it's hard to know.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, cool, man. I just can't help it in the South talking a little bit of fishing for sure and all that. But today, we know we're going to talk a lot of trees, and everyone knows that oak trees are a tremendous food source for fall deer, and in the fall, a lot of people target those to hunt around. But can you lay out a few of the lesser known tree types that, whether they're mass producing or not, that will be attracting deer this fall?
Lesser known, I mean, yeah, like you said, everybody's familiar with some of the bigger, the main oak groups, your red oaks and the white oaks, and where those all fall. But locally and regionally, it can vary. There are species within each of those two families. You got the white oaks, which includes, of course, the true white oak, and within that family, you'll have trees like the post oak, the swamp chestnut oak, bur oaks, swamp white oaks, and some others like that. Live oaks are in the white oak family, and that's a common southern tree. And then you got your reds, like the red, northern and southern red oaks, water oaks, pin oaks, cherry bark, and some others that are all good. And understanding kind of the differences between those two is important. Then you got some fruit trees you can't overlook. You got native persimmons and crab apples, and even beech and things like that. That once you learn to identify them and key in on them, the good thing about knowing a diversity of them is that a lot of them are all falling at different times of the year. So even though head to head, deer might prefer a white oak over a red oak, or a white oak over a beech nuts if they're available, they're not always head to head. They're available at different times. So knowing where they are and what they are can really help you from a deer hunting strategy standpoint, and being able to shift when those food sources shift.
Sure. So this is a question I've asked a few times to a few different guys, including old Matt Ross, but the locust trees, we've got, I guess, a couple of varieties down here, I believe. And last year, I actually almost shot a doe on a public piece that was in a family group that was just chowing down. And this was late November when things really start to turn brown around here. And so I just wanted to see if you might have a little bit of information on how preferential they are, what time of year are these deer eating those pods, because there's not a whole lot left in the woods at that point, or do they actually like them?
No, they do like them. I mean, they are not super high on the preference list, but it is, like you said, it often depends on what they're up against. Now, the ones you've got, is that honey locust?
I think they're more black. But
black locust?
I think there's black, but I'm not sure of actually the different types we have, but I've looked at the honey locust range, and I can't remember if we're kind of on the edge of it or not. Cannot remember.
Yeah. And I think we've got honey locusts here in Georgia, and they're not terribly common, but we do have them. And like you say, those pods, they'll eat those when they're falling. But generally, it's like a lot of some of the other oaks besides those in the white oak family. It's less preferred, but if it's the one thing out there, they're definitely a place you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. And I think we've seen that some via trail camera observations and just from the stand as well. And we all think about, I guess when we're talking hard mast, everybody always thinks about acorns, right, with oaks. Like everybody always thinks about oak trees and deer. It's just kind of, they go hand in hand. But what other types of hard mast do deer actually pay attention to? We got a ton of different types of hickories, where there's like shagbark or the standard, I don't know, where the regular hickory tree is, or, we got quite a few pecans around too. Are deer targeting those types of hard mast as well?
They will, and we've got a lot of pecans here in Georgia, and I've heard of folks.
Wait, a lot of what? What did you?
Pecans.
Pecan. Okay.
If you don't know what that is, you're not saying it right. We've got pecans here in Georgia, and I've heard of some other trees that sound different, but it is not the same. It's
okay,
pecan. But,
I got you. Okay.
Yeah, and I've heard of folks talking about deer eating pecans in their pecan orchards or whatever, but it's not again, high on the list. And the same with hickories. If you're seeing deer eat hickory nuts and pecans, which are generally pretty hard shelled, and unlike an acorn, it's not as easy to get into. Generally, that's a sign they don't have a whole lot to eat at that point, and it's probably a sign that you need some better habitat. You need something else out there for them to eat if they're eating hickory nuts and pecans.
Yeah, sure. I like that you kind of tapped into that, because I always have these things that I like to look for and try to learn more about, because I don't know a ton of them, but there's always these little signals, these little signs that the deer will tell you if you pay attention to it, or you can just see. Like, for instance, I always know that when the hawks start coming through and you start seeing hawk cauldrons down here in Texas, like the season's starting to change and you're starting to get those big, I guess, northern weather events that come through, and just different things that you can key in on like that. And of course, like, one of the biggest signs of fall is the leaves turning and falling. Right, and that's just kind of fall, right? Like, the leaves are falling. But so we've talked about mast, but do you know of some of the types of trees that we can actually target for the leaves that fall off of the trees? Because I know, like, Tyler and I have seen deer walk around underneath the stand or whatever and browse on what's the Osage orange or horse apple or bodark, bodark leaves. Are there other types of leaves that we can target for deer consumption?
Yeah, it's they'll eat just about anything, but again, it comes down to what's out there. I mean, a deer's digestive system is designed to work best with a diversity of foods, and people often don't understand this, overlook it. That they think that if they've got a patch of clover there, the deer will just stand there and fill up, and that's not the way it works. They'll kind of run and gun and hit a food plot in sort of a drive-by fashion, and then move off and eat something else that you might think is lower quality. But their stomach works best when they've got some things that are more digestible and other things that are less digestible. So they're always eating newer, younger, and older, a mix of different stuff, and plants you wouldn't normally think they're going to eat. But again, in general, hardwood leaves, particularly mature, full-grown hardwood leaves and older leaves, if they're eating that, and if they're eating a lot of it, and particularly if you see a browse line in the woods, it generally means there's not enough of better foods out there. Just like any plant, and oaks are the same way with whether you're talking about seedlings or saplings or just limbs they can reach. With any plant, when it's new and young, that's when it's most digestible and nutritious to the deer, and they're more likely to eat it. So if you're seeing them eating older, full-grown, dried leaves toward the end of summer and fall, it generally means they're eating enough of what they really would prefer to have out there.
So, I know we've got a couple of little strips in this area, and then also I used to hunt a farm in Arkansas that had a ton of sweet gums, and they turn a lot of colors in the fall. And as far as I know, that's because of a few reasons. I guess one of which may have to do with sugars within the leaves. Do those? Have you ever noticed this? I know I'm getting specific, but have you ever noticed that when the sweet gum leaves start to fall and change color and everything, that they would key in on the leaves of those? We've been interested in that, Casey and I have.
Not where I am. Now, I have seen a deer eat a sweet gum leaf now and then, but it almost kind of shocked me. It's like, wow, they actually ate that.
Yeah.
We kill sweet gums around here. It's a native tree, and it does have pretty colors, but in Georgia, and I don't know if where you are in that part of the South, if it's the same, plays the same role, but here it is the first tree that fills up any area that's disturbed.
Oh, yeah.
And will quickly shade that out if you don't control them. So if you leave it alone, you'll have sweet gums everywhere, and to the detriment of a lot better trees and ground level understory forbs and things they eat. And so we generally, that's one of the trees we spend a lot of time killing just to put daylight back on the ground. But no, in my experience, yes, they'll occasionally eat a leaf, but like I said, it almost surprised me to see it happen.
Yeah, it's good to know, because it's like taking a multiple choice test. once we start taking these certain tree types out of the equation, we can pretty much come down to like oaks again, But
That's right.
And back to oaks, I guess, it seems like every piece of literature that I read on oaks has discrepancies about the names or the distribution of certain types of oaks. What are the basic features that we can be looking for that would help us determine the type of oak and its preference maybe to whitetails?
Well, you've got the two basic families, and hunters should understand this if nothing else. You've got most of your oaks fall into either the white or red oak family. And in general, in the white oak family, which, does include the white oak, but it includes some other trees, you're talking about generally round lobed leaves, whereas red oaks have pointed lobes on their leaves. A white oak, the acorn, most people may not know this, but the acorn grows in the course of 1 year. In other words, it goes from flower to acorn, to falling off the tree in the same year. Whereas a red oak acorn and acorns in species in the red oak family, they take 2 years to mature so they'll be at like this fall, when you look on a red oak limb, you'll see acorns of two different ages, those that are about to fall that are, a year and a half old, and those that were flowers this last spring and won't fall until next year. And that's one of the ways that you can divide the trees too. The bark often on the red oaks is darker, whereas bark on white oak family trees tends to be lighter. And then, of course, like most hunters know, generally deer prefer acorns in the white oak family better than they prefer red oaks. That doesn't mean they don't eat red oak acorns, they do, but understanding the difference there and why they prefer the white oaks first can be a key in your hunting strategy. And it generally has to do with tannic acid in the acorn. White oak acorns, hit the ground with a lot less tannic acid in the acorn, and so they're less bitter. But that also means they don't last as long. So where trees in the red oak family have higher levels of tannic acid in the acorn, it means right off the bat they're not as preferred, but they will last weeks, months even on the ground and still be viable for deer to eat long after they fell off the tree. And that can be important not only for like a late season hunting strategy when the white oaks are gone, or certainly if the white oaks had a poor year, but also from a nutrition standpoint as you get beyond hunting season into winter and even spring and summer. There was a great story several years back out of Mississippi about a biologist that was called out to examine two dead deer that someone had called in, and they went to examine them, from out of disease concern. And there these were two does laying underneath a water oak tree, stone dead. And he got to looking around and he saw streaks of burnt hair down their sides. Well, it turned out they'd been standing under that oak in a lightning storm. Lightning hit the tree and killed both of them. And just to be safe, he did a necropsy on both deer, including looking at the stomach contents. And this was in June, and they were both packed with water oak acorns.
Wow.
So those acorns had been on the ground and stayed viable for months, and these deer were eating them in June. So, not only from a hunting strategy standpoint, but from a habitat standpoint too, this is one reason not to overlook anything in the red oak family, which a water oak, by the way, is in the red oak family. Mm-hmm. So where white oaks, certainly deer, if they're falling and just having a good year, deer are going to be there first. But if the white oaks fail in a given season and there are red oak acorn family falling, that's a good place to be, but late season too.
Sure, yeah, mm-hmm. And I think that we've seen that play out in some of our hunting scenarios. And we hunt a lot of public land here in Texas. Not that there is a lot of public land here, but what we do is hunt some of the public. And two things we've noticed is that deer really don't seem to like post oaks that much because they're so prevalent. Or I don't know if that's why they don't like them, but just for being a white oak, they don't tend to hit them as much. And two, the deer seem to really gravitate towards shoe-marked oaks, which are in the red oak family. And I don't know if it's a situation where the tannins are lower or if it's just because the shoe-marks tend to come off first, so they're the first hard mast on the ground. But we kind of have a discrepancy there. And is it just one of those deals where we kind of learned as hunters where white oaks are what you should look for and red oaks not so much, but there's always kind of an exception to the rule? Is that kind of how that would be?
Yes, there's always exceptions in both families. And like in the white oak family, for example, we've got 2 different trees here in Georgia, and I think you've got them in East Texas too. One is the swamp chestnut oak. It's not a chestnut tree, it is an oak. It's the swamp chestnut oak, and the other one is a chestnut oak. Again, neither one of them are chestnuts, they are oak trees. But these, to look at the leaf and the bark and the acorn in general, you'd think they were very close to being the same tree. It would be hard to tell apart, except that swamp chestnut oaks tend to grow in floodplains in lower coastal or upper and lower coastal plain areas, whereas the chestnut oak occurs in uplands of the Piedmont and even into the Appalachian Mountains in North Georgia. But though they look the same, bark, leaf, and acorns look about the same, and in the white oak family, it is well known deer just do not care much for chestnut oak acorns, those that grow in the uplands, particularly compared to the normal white oak, whereas a swamp chestnut oak like we have in the coastal plain of Georgia is just dynamite. I mean, they're, I think, beyond a regular white oak in terms of preference, and they're big. You need to be wearing a hard hat if you're going to sit under one of these trees and these things are falling. I'm not kidding. And it's like, I love nothing more than to watch a deer try to eat one, and they can do it. But, it's almost they have to get a foot in there, too, to try to get the acorn back in the back part of their jaw and split it open. But they love those things. So there's one of those discrepancies, whereas to look at a chestnut oak and you'd think, hey, white oak bark, white oak leaves, the acorn looks like a white oak, this must be a good place to be, and it's just not. I mean, they'll eat them, particularly, again, like I said, given what they're up against in a given year. And if there's not much else out there, they'll certainly eat them, but they are not like a white oak or a swamp chestnut oak, where if they're falling, the deer are going to be there. It's like a magnet.
Sure, yeah. And I was going to ask you that, something with the size of the acorn that deer can actually eat, because in the same scenario, we have these big, in the white oak family, bur oaks here, but the acorns are just, bigger than a golf ball. And I always kind of wondered if a deer can actually ingest something that big, but I guess the chestnut oak or the swamp chestnut is pretty similar in size.
Yeah, they are. I think bur oaks may get a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
I've seen some, and every tree's different. Even, individuals within a species aren't always going to have the exact same size acorn.
Sure.
But I've seen some bur oaks that were enormous. And, same with swamp chestnut. I picked some up on our family's land this past fall, and I could only get 5 in the palm of my hand. I couldn't have held any more.
Wow, that's cool.
So they're big. But like I say, to watch a deer, and I've done it many times, watching does, while I'm bow hunting near one of these trees and watching does come in and feeding on them, they'll pick it up and they'll kind of get their mouth open just as wide as they can, and you could see them trying to work that thing to the back of their jaw, in between the molars. And when they finally get it there, you'll hear this crack, when they crack through it. And then they will spit out the hole and eat the acorn. So, it takes a little work, but they definitely do it.
Yeah, it's worth the reward, I suppose, for them. So, something that you mentioned earlier that was pretty enlightening to me, and I don't know if this is just I am a little bit hard-headed and never really think about it this way, but I always assumed, because in the little bit of studying I've done, I understood that red oaks are every other year acorn. Right, but I never understood. I wanted to clarify. You said that the tree can put off each year, but it just has 2 stages of acorn on the tree. Is that correct?
That's right. It will drop acorns every year, but one year class of acorns takes 2 years or 2 falls to mature. So at any one point in the fall, if you pull down a red oak limb and look at it, you should find, if it's got if it had good crops both years, or decent crops, you should find both 2-year classes, acorns that are about to fall that year, and smaller ones that are still developing and won't fall until a year from now. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, mast crop and what kind of dictates how good a mast crop is going to be for that year, or if on red oaks it could possibly be, 2 years out? Is it a temperature thing, or is it a water thing, or a pollination thing, or what really depends on how good of a mast crop you're going to have?
Casey, I don't think anybody has ever teased that out in the science and said, here's what it is, that they know. The fact is, they have established that oaks are just inconsistent. They, by nature, and when you think about it, there are a lot of factors involved. You can have a late frost, for example, that damages the flowers after they've formed. That can impact the crop. Droughts, like you said, certainly can. Other factors, weevils can get in them. All kinds of things can affect that, but just even if you could sort of, all things being equal, an oak tree is just going to be inconsistent. They're stubborn and tough to predict. I mean, I know some research at the University of Tennessee has shown roughly that about every 5 out of 5 years, your average oak tree is going to have a good year 2 of those years, and no way to know which ones it's going to be. So you get a ton of variation, and I don't know, maybe it's just built-in inconsistency that helps prevent things like acorn predators building up. For example, weevils, acorn weevils. You know, when there's a good acorn year, they get good reproduction, and there's a bunch of weevils the next year. Well, if the tree had great acorn crops every year, weevils would just build up and build up and build up. Same thing with squirrels and anything else that eats a lot of acorns. And so I've often wondered if it's not just a survival adaptation. You're inconsistent, and that way your fruit predators don't build up to the point that you never can get an acorn to the seedling stage.
Yeah, man, Lindsay, you're a smart guy. I never really thought about that being, a way for oaks to kind of defend themselves against parasites. That's cool. I never really thought about that. Earlier you talked about the individuality of each tree. Do you have trees that are just better producers just on an individual basis too?
Yes, you do. And that same study that I was talking about at the University of Tennessee, some of the students of Dr. Craig Harper looked at this. And I think one of the things they saw was that in any given year or across time, about 40% of all oak trees are just going to be poor producers. Is it genetics? Is it the site, the soil? There's probably some of all that involved. And they said somewhere around 11% of trees are, they rated as excellent producers, with everything else in between good and fair. So, all things being equal, again, not every tree you find. And this goes back to talking about scouting, particularly on public land. If you're trying to be in the right place at the right time with the right tree, don't just identify the tree by bark and leaves in the spring and go, okay, here's where my stand's going to be. You're going to have to come back and find multiple trees, but then come back to those and determine which of those in that year are going to have a crop, if at all, because of this inconsistency, but also because of the fact that you've got individuals out there that are better than others. You're going to have to do your homework to make sure in any given year which tree is the one to be hunting near.
Yeah. So say you have scouted out 3 trees in the summertime, and you come back in the fall, right before deer season, and you see that 2 of them are going to have considerably more mass production than the other one. Well, can you assume that they're? I guess my question would be better stated this way: is there a chance that one of those trees is putting off fruit that tastes better, a lot better, and would be higher preferential than the other one?
I would say it would depend on the species. I mean, are you saying that if they're all white oaks, for example?
Yes, yeah. If they're, or like in our case, we don't have a ton of whites other than the posts, and so like one of our highest preferential species would be the shumards. So say you find 3 shumard trees, 2 of them are going to produce probably an equal amount of mast. And could you assume that, or could you think that maybe one might taste better than the other? And is there any way other than to just go in there in October? Is there any way to find that out other than, I guess you could taste them? I mean, KC would do that.
I don't think there is, Tyler. It's
okay.
And I've heard people talk about that we'll fertilize oaks to make them sweeter, but there's no evidence of that. In fact, there's evidence that just fertilizing in general doesn't have an impact on acorn production at all, whether you're talking about taste or amount or anything else. So no, if you've got, in general, in an area, in my observation and based on the science I've read about this, that all the white oaks, or all, in your case, the shumard oaks, are going to be equally preferred. It's all about the amount. And if you've got a cluster of trees in one area that all seem, most of them relatively loaded, that's going to be a good place to be. And if there's one tree off by itself and it's only got an average to fair crop, I'd be where the more acorns are. So, yeah, I don't think that it comes down to individual trees within a species having better acorns than others.
Right. okay, so on continuing on the scouting, how are you scouting this time of year in the spring to summer? How are you? Give us a few tips on how to find what you're looking for in hopes that in the fall you'll be successful.
Okay, a couple of things in spring, like in turkey season, and it's already passed here within the last couple of weeks. But in spring, I'm looking for crabapple blooms. That we have the southern crabapple. I'm pretty sure you've got it in East Texas, and they bloom in spring, real pretty white to pink blooms. And if you'll pay attention to that, you will often discover crabapples you didn't know were there. Because other than that, it's kind of a nondescript tree with a plain leaf, and might be difficult to tease out of the background of all these other green leafy things. Mm-hmm. But the flowers give it away real quick. So then, mark that to check back. Persimmons this time of year, that with a persimmon, there are male and female trees, right? Mm-hmm. And that means only the female trees produce the fruit. So if you hang your stand over a male persimmon, it's going to be a slow day. Yeah. So, knowing now if you find a persimmon tree right now, you need to know which one's going to have the fruit in October and November. It's going to be the female, but you can look at the flowers right now. The persimmons around here are just now flowering. So it's a good opportunity to look. The flowers are different on the male to female. And I can go into that if you wanted to, but so using tips like that to identify the female persimmons right now. And then meanwhile, if you're scouting for trees, identifying your oaks based on bark and leaves right now, most of the acorns, or all the acorns, are going to be too small to see way up in the canopy. But when you come back, and I would be using this time of year to locate your individual trees. Mm-hmm. And then late summer, August to September, by then your acorns are getting big enough, you can come back with your binoculars and basically go on a glassing trip and go back to those trees and spend some time underneath them, walking around beneath and glassing the canopy, looking for the acorns. The thing to remember with white oak family trees, we were talking about them being produced in 1 year. They grow out on the very tips of the limbs with the very terminal leaves in the New Year's growth. So they're fairly easy to spot, on the clustered ends of the branches. Whereas red oak family acorns grow a little bit back on the limb itself. So they'll be, rather than out on the tips with the leaves, you'll have to kind of look, a few inches to a foot or two back up the branch for those acorns. Mm-hmm. But, bring a good pair of binoculars and spend some time under these trees looking. The other thing to do is that I like is after a late summer thunderstorm, you get an afternoon thunderstorm comes through and gets windy for a little while. Well, that afternoon or next day, go out. That often will knock down little twigs and branches out of these trees. Not necessarily big old limbs, but small twigs and branches, and you can look at those on the ground under the tree, and there'll be acorns on them if the tree has got any crop to speak of. So it's going to take, a little late summer scouting before hunting season comes in, and those acorns have formed to really dial down to which trees have good crops and how many. Mm-hmm. Let me give you one more tip on public land that I would throw in there, and that is, and I think this is, y'all know this and a lot of people do, I would start my tree scouting by getting away from roads. Mm-hmm. And that simply is putting other hunters behind you. Lots of other hunters know to look for white oaks and acorns and things like that, but it's the ones that are further from the road that are really going to put you in better territory. And again, there's research on this. Folks have actually put GPS wrist collars on hunters and studied their patterns on public land. And what they found is beyond about a third of a mile off the road, you have put about 87% of your competition from other hunters behind you. So that's where I wouldn't start scouting up by the road. I'd first put some distance between me and the nearest drivable trail, and then start finding, looking for the trees you want to hunt. All
right, that's a good piece of advice. I guess a question I have that in regards to red oaks is, so if it's a 2-year cycle, the 1-year-old acorns, are they going to be just a smaller acorn, and how do you, so I guess what I'm saying is, if you're tree scouting, how do you know that tree doesn't just have a really good crop of 1-year-old acorns that aren't going to put out this year?
Yeah, they're going to be so different in size. You will not see next year's on a red oak tree. Once you have studied, this fall, And I've actually got some photos of this that I've taken. But this fall, if you can get your hands on a red oak limb and pull it down and look at it and see what I'm talking about, this year's crop will certainly be big enough to see. They'll be almost fully developed acorns. Next year's crop will still be very tiny. They're even sometimes difficult to tell that they're acorns. They almost look like little leaf buds or something.
Okay.
But they are there. No, you don't need to worry about that in this fall, worrying about seeing next year's acorns.
Sure.
You will see, if you see acorns in your binoculars standing under a tree, those are going to fall this year.
Mm-hmm. See, I now that you say that, I can picture what they look like in my mind, but I just, like KC said, I didn't realize that it was a 2-year growth process. I just thought it was like, we're going to put them out every other year as like a salmon run or something like that, So,
yeah.
Cool. Well, in our area, we have a ton of willow oaks, and the best I can understand is that they're an Arkansas swamp oak of some kind, maybe. But they're kind of a thin leaf that almost looks like a dinosaur track. It's just got like, it's real thin at the base, and it comes and it kind of spreads out and almost has like 3 lobes towards the end. And these trees put out a similar looking acorn, in my opinion. They're small, they're really orange on the inside, and we had experience last year, late season in December, where we were sitting in a big one of these trees that had put out a lot of acorns, and they also seemed to put them out pretty early, like the rest of the oaks in October, but it didn't seem like that the deer and the hogs were really getting after them until a little bit later in the year. Is that because of just preference and the fact that they're going to eat other acorns first and some of these other forbs and such until everything starts to die and they run out of that? And then are they preferring that more than things they can get in December that may be around, such as the locust pods or whatever?
Yeah, it's part of that is, like I talked about, the tannic acid that's in those.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the red oak family, and that tree you're talking about is now a willow oak. We've got a willow oak here that's similar to a water oak. It's just a simple single-lobed leaf, and it has a small acorn like a water oak, and they're very orange on the inside, and in the red oak family, but high in tannic acid when they fall. Now, that tannic acid fades over time. Again, this goes back to what I was saying about them lasting on the ground. Red oak acorns last a good long time on the ground. They don't actually, a white oak acorn will put down a taproot and start growing fairly quick. You've probably noticed this, even in the fall, that they, it's October, November, you're hunting, and if you dig around in the leaf litter, you can find some white oak acorns that fell this year that are already putting down a taproot. And so they get busy. They don't last long on the ground, and they're either going to rot and go away or put down a taproot and get to work. Whereas a red oak acorn is going to last a while. The tannic acid helps with that. It's kind of a preservative, but it also, like you're saying, keeps things from eating it unless it's all they've got. They're going to go to other things first, and later, after those tannic acid levels have dropped and there's less alternative foods, that's when they're going to come back to those. So it all depends. I mean, in southeast Georgia where I hunt, there's land that I hunt down there where there's a lot of water oak acorns, not as many in the white oak family except for ones we have planted. And generally, when those water oak acorns are falling, if there's not much else, they'll be on them pretty quick, and they will definitely eat them early season. But if there are other things available, particularly in areas where there's a good white oak crop competing, they'll be on that first, and they will overlook the red oaks until later. White oak acorns, the true white oak, I'm not just referring to the family, but the white oak tree and the swamp chestnut oak tree, when those things are falling, they'll pull deer off almost anything else. I've seen them pull deer off of food plots. They'll pull deer off of corn. This is why, for example, when you're doing a preseason trail camera survey, which is what we recommend hunters do for data collection about your herd, you do that before hunting season starts and bucks start to die, and before any acorns start to fall, because you have to use corn as your bait, and acorns will interfere with that. That'll start pulling deer away, particularly the white oaks. I have seen northern and southern red oaks. I've seen seasons where deer were on them as soon as they hit the ground, but it was almost always because there was a white oak failure that year.
Yeah, so on that deal, is there anything where the frost has an effect on hard mast like that, like where maybe those tannin-rich acorns are more resilient to freezes as opposed to, a white oak acorn?
That's a good question. I don't know. I know that frosts, late spring freezes, can affect the crop simply by damaging the trees and the flowers when they're in the process of producing the acorns. But in terms of it affecting the tannic acid level, I don't know. That may be part of that. It's sort of a timing mechanism that prevents the acorn from going to put down a tap root and beginning to germinate until it's optimal time for them.
But
that's speculation.
Well, your speculation is worth a lot to us, to tell you the truth.
I don't know about that.
So we've talked a lot about, tree scouting and finding tree on public land or whatever. Maybe it's your private place that has a large wooded area. But say you do have a piece of private property and you want to make some improvements on that. I know that acorns have to go through, or at least the ones that I've messed with, I've done it a little bit, something called stratification. Do you ever stratify any oak acorns and plant trees that way?
Yeah, we've done it all the time. My dad's done it for years and taught me. He has always, this is where I got my interest in trees, was from my dad. From a young age, he had me out there with him planting seedlings each year, but collecting acorns and putting them, he would just always put them in a bag with a little dirt and put them in the bottom of the refrigerator in the crisper drawer and leave them there until spring and take them back out and put them in pots or trays and put them outside and grow them. You can stratify them by leaving them outside in dirt and pots. But the problem we found with that was squirrels would dig them up. So
that's exactly right.
Dad would do them in the refrigerator, or he eventually built a cage with a lid on it. It looked like a shark cage, except it wasn't quite that big. And he would put his tree pots in there to keep the squirrels out of them.
Mm-hmm. That's a good idea. My dad had 9, I believe, shumards planted this winter to stratify in plants, and he was, I guess it got to about mid-April, and he was really confused as why they hadn't come up yet. And he went out there, and there was no acorns in any of his pots. So he experienced exactly what you were talking about. But
it's a hungry world out there.
That's
right.
Everything's trying to eat an acorn for sure. So on that note, a lot of people really like to plant hard mast and acorns because it's the big hitter, right? It's what we all like to hunt. We all key in on. Deer love them. But what about soft mast? Should a person be concerned with planting different types of soft mast on their property?
Yeah, you can be. The rule I always say when it comes to planting trees is plant what you don't have. Mm-hmm. So you have to first sort of do an inventory. If you're talking about a piece of hunting property, whether you own it or just have permission or lease it or whatever, do an inventory. What have you got? If you've got a bunch of white oaks, you don't need to plant those or red oak or anything else. If you don't have crab apples or persimmons or mulberries and black gum, there's pawpaws, there's all kind of things we could talk about here. Each of those has a window of time when they're dropping fruit. Some of them are in summer when you can't hunt over them and et cetera. But if you don't have those, it's always a good idea to go with diversity, to fill in the gaps of what you have, both to help you from a hunting strategy standpoint, but also from a habitat quality and nutrition standpoint and diversity. Most of us want things besides deer out there. We want to see turkeys and all kinds of things that we don't hunt. And so, having that diversity out there is good. And I would say it starts with taking inventory. What do you not have that you'd like to have, and plant those?
Yeah. So Casey has a theory, and I'll let him explain this later on. But are you concerned with planting native plants to the region, or are we just trying to make a property as healthy as we can try to make it?
I'm always about natives.
Okay.
They are the ones that are adapted to be here. They belong here, and many non-natives are simply problematic. Not all of them, but you take the autumn olive, for example. That was one that, years and years ago, even some foresters recommended this because it produced lots of fruit that birds loved, and it does. But the thing has taken off and become a problem in so many areas, and there's other species like that we could talk about. But yeah, most of my time I spend killing those kind of trees. and planting, replacing them with the natives that belong here. So I am a fan of natives.
Yeah. I assume there's information or somebody worth talking to for pretty much every region of the U.S. if you had an interest in what's native to your area.
Absolutely, yeah. QDMA on our website, we've got an article called "Plant This, Not That," and it's been popular over the years. And what it is simply a guide to, here's a list of all the non-native things that over the years various people have said were good to plant for wildlife that you shouldn't plant, and the alternatives to those that are native that you should consider first. So it's kind of a guide to, all the good, bad, and ugly out there of non-natives and what you should do first.
Right. Okay. We can link to that actually in the notes. So if you're listening, check that out. As far as, I guess on public land last year, we had kind of discovered, KC's pretty observant when it comes to just about anything, but he noticed that on some of our trail cameras that we were having these doe family groups come through in, I don't know, March, I guess, and it was when all of our cedar elms were blooming out, and they were browsing the buds off these cedar elm trees. And so I guess it made me curious to think, are there certain trees that we could be planting, and what, if so, that create browse and cover because they're a shorter tree?
Yeah. One I like is a Chickasaw plum. That's a native tree to the south, and it's a thicket-forming plant. It will start growing. It will eventually start sort of putting out runners, and you'll see little seedlings popping up near other trees once they get going. And it stays short and shrubby and forms a thicket. But it does produce small plums. They fall in June, really, so it's not a hunting season type thing. And deer do browse them. In fact, we've got some growing here at QDMA headquarters, which we have a pretty high deer density here, and they've got browse lines on them where the deer have come up and browsed them.
Nice.
But generally, if they're not being browsed like that too hard by high deer density, they'll form thickets. It's good bedding cover, not only for deer but a lot of other things. And that's a good one. American plum is another native that's good. Allegheny chinkapin is a pretty good tree. That is, and it's more of a shrubby type thing that puts on. It's in the chestnut family, related to a chestnut, American chestnut, but it has a much smaller little sweet nut that it puts out that deer like if the squirrels let them have any, and shrubby, thick, dense growing. Now it is, because it's in the chestnut family, it is slightly susceptible to the chestnut blight, and occasionally will get killed back by that. But it's a native and shrub forming tree that can be pretty good, and there's others out there.
Cool.
Yeah, that's cool. So if a person's ever done any research on habitat improvements for whitetail deer or other species as well, they probably have heard a little bit about hinge cutting. And I kind of understand the basics of it. You go through the woods and you find a tree and you take it and you cut it, but you don't cut it all the way, and you lean it over to where there's still some bark connected. But the selection of what trees to do that with is kind of perplexed me through the years. Can you talk a little bit about what trees you should hinge cut and for what reasons?
Well, it should always be when you're killing a tree like that, and hinge cutting doesn't kill it dead. It will eventually die, but it tips it over, leaves it alive on the ground. Whether you are hinge cutting or taking a chainsaw and simply making a stump, or using herbicides and injecting it to kill the tree, it needs to be a tree you don't need, that is either lower value for wildlife, or sometimes there are trees, and I did this some, in fact, just this past weekend, cutting down maples that deer will browse, cutting it to the stump, and then some stump sprouts are going to come out of that, and the deer will browse those. But what I've done in the meantime is put sunlight on the ground. So, yeah, you always want to be thinking about the species of trees you want and those you don't necessarily need, and those would be the first that I'd be looking to hinge cut. And now, certainly, there are trees that deer will browse, like maples, like black cherry, like winged elm, and some others that you can tip over. They don't produce mast really, and you could tip over as a hinge cut, and they'll browse the leaves. Although those leaves are not that great nutritionally, But if you cut that thing to a stump and the stump sprouts come out, that is super high nutrition. They're very digestible. Plus, there's some research now that shows that a stump like that, I mean, it's got the root system of an entire tree feeding just a few small handful of sprouts, and those sprouts, as a result, will be high in mineral content. So I like a good stump most of the time. But then the other thing to remember is that there's no sacred tree out there. You might be trying to encourage white oaks, and those are good trees, but if you come to a spot in the woods and you need daylight there, and there are 5 small white oak seedlings growing there fairly close to each other, none of them is ever going to be a great tree because they're kind of crowded. I'd pick the best one and cut the others down. And that's what this is all about, is selecting for forest management over time so that you help the individual trees you leave be the best they can with space and resources that you're giving them, and removing either things that are low value or that are surplus to the species you left. And, as far as hinge cutting goes, to me, that's a good strategy if you need the structure right there. If you're either trying to, say, block a deer trail or hide your own trail coming in, or, create instant structure. But if you're just trying to daylight a forest and you want more forage on the ground by putting sunlight on the dirt, most of the time the better option is just cut the tree down or use herbicides to kill it standing.
So when you cut the tree down, are you just leaving that as kind of bedding cover, or are you trying to get rid of the whole tree and get it out of there?
No, just leaving it.
Yeah.
It can be structure on the ground. Plus it will, eventually, like the area I was cutting these maples down in last weekend, that will be coming back through there with prescribed fire next year. So those, tops will dry out and then they'll burn up eventually. But yeah, it certainly doesn't hurt anything for them to be laying there. And in the meantime, like you said, it's a little bit of cover and structure.
Yeah. Well, so that's kind of brings up a question that I've always had when it comes to hinge cutting is, I guess eventually when you go into burn, is that going to burn up those trees that you've hinge cut, and then, have you kind of, I guess, defeated the purpose of, I would assume that honeysuckle and poison ivy or sumac or whatever could grow up on these things and kind of make, these walls that could be considered bedding cover on these type of things. But when you go in to burn that area, is it going to burn up what you did hinge cutting there, I guess?
Sure, yeah. It will if you use prescribed fire in that area. And that's one of the drawbacks. Hinge cutting is kind of one of these things that everybody talked about how great it was for a long time and all the positives, and it does have a lot of positives, but folks didn't really slow down and say, wait a minute, let's talk about reasons you might not want to do a hinge cut in a certain area.
Yeah.
And that there's a lot of those. It is, when I've done it, you tip the tree over, the top remains alive, then the stump starts putting out sprouts and suckers, and it really becomes, the longer the tree lives, it becomes a mess. And so the more of this you've done in an area, the more of this tangled mess you've got. And if that's what you wanted, if you wanted to, say, screen a property line or create just a bedding mess in there, that's fine. But if you need to get back in there, say, with loggers to cut some timber, or your four-wheeler to drag a deer out, or like you said, with fire, that mess can become an obstacle, particularly if you left, say, for example, valuable timber in there, like maybe pines or white oaks or hardwoods, and if any of these tops have piled up near those or around them, and then you burn and that catches on fire, that's going to be so much hotter than just the leaf litter and dead grass you burn most of the time when you're burning.
Right.
And that could damage and harm trees you've left. So it's just something you think through carefully before you crank a saw and start hinge cutting everywhere.
Right.
Sure, yeah. And once you have cranked that saw and hinge cut, or in your case, you really are a big fan of mineral stumps, which sounds great to me. I can see a lot of benefits from that. Are you then planting something in that created sunlight, like some type of tree that you kind of had anticipated being able to plant there, or are you waiting to see what comes up natively there?
Most of the time waiting to see what comes up, and it's just a matter of putting the sunlight on the ground, and sometimes the following year using a little fire, however, depends on the exact strategy there, but the seeds of everything you need are there in the dirt. They just need to be released with a little sunlight and maybe some soil disturbance with fire. And things are going to come up, grasses, forbs, and vines, and all of these things that are the first stage of a forest that, the hinge cut the difference is that's instant cover. Tomorrow a deer could come bed down in that top. Whereas grasses and forbs and vines I'm talking about are going to be excellent bedding cover, but they're not going to come along for months to maybe a year before it really, becomes high quality. So there's a difference. Do you need the cover right now, or are you just trying to create a broad landscape availability of forage and cover in a big way? And if that's your goal there, just the forest improvement will do that in a big way. Removing trees you don't need, selecting the ones you want to enhance with the space you've given them, and putting sunlight on the ground to encourage the native plants that are there already. The seeds are there. You don't have to spend $1 on seed, and let it come in. Now, there's a little bit of fine-tuning here. A dormant season fire in general is going to encourage more grasses, by and large, not total grasses, but more grasses in general, whereas a growing season fire, like in late summer, is going to encourage more forbs, leafy plants that deer will eat. And that's from some research by, again, Dr. Craig Harper at the University of Tennessee. So there's some fine-tuning there, but if all you can do is burn in winter and you put some sunlight on the ground and you're doing a little fire, or even if you don't do fire, you're gonna have a lot of benefits there for foraging cover.
Sure, yeah, and I guess the different options you're talking about kind of depends on where you're at in your stage of practicing QDM on your property. So, say you have just purchased a piece. Is there any tree that you go in there and say automatically that's the tree? I mean, that does not belong here. I'm taking it out right away. Is there any trees that are on that list?
Sweet gum for me would be right up at the top. But then, particularly anything that's non-native, like a China berry, which is a non-native invasive, autumn olives. There's a tree called a Paulonia or princess tree, I believe. And then, the other terrible one that seems to have come on here lately where I am is a Bradford pear.
Really?
That's what they sell it as at the big box garden stores. Bradford pear for your yard. These are the things that stink when they bloom and don't produce anything that anything wants to eat. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, sir. Yeah, we've got quite a few of them.
Yeah, people plant them in their suburban yards, and all this is it's a calorie pear that most people use as rootstock for improved pear varieties. It's only the base of the tree, but you don't want to let it sprout and sucker because it's not a good tree, and it's terribly invasive. Those things are spreading all over the place. So those trees, that'll be one of the very first ones that I come at with a vengeance.
Yeah, it seems like around here, one of our biggest invasives, well, we have quite a few China berries, and then also the Chinese tallow is really taking root, especially in the southern part of Texas, and they can just turn a pasture into a solid Chinese tallow forest in no time, it seems. It's kind of crazy how much they can take over.
They're pretty bad in waterways, aren't they? Sort of.
Yes, sir. And to be honest, much of the southeastern region of the state, at least, is so wet that it seems like they can do well anywhere, Right. But the bee farmers all really like it because apparently the tallow is the best honey off of a bee. But for the rest of us, it's kind of a invasive that isn't doing anything a lot of good, minus maybe doves or something like that.
Right. All of them have, maybe a little bit of good that they do, but when you compare that to its invasive tendencies, which means it's going to take over. And we'll do that if you let it. It really, you need to keep these things under control. There are so many good native alternatives.
So on that note, are there a couple of certain plants that you like to plant, that you plant them because not just they are beneficial to whitetails, but that there are several species, and not turkeys even, something that wouldn't be considered like big game, or maybe not even game, that it benefits several different species?
Yeah, there's some. I've planted some dogwoods over the years, and that produces a berry. They're not terribly consistent producers, and it's a slow-growing tree that produces but it does produce a berry, and turkeys love those. I've planted pawpaw trees. Do you know what a pawpaw is, or have you ever eaten a pawpaw?
I mean, I have a grandpa that you could call pawpaw, but that's about it. I can't say I've ever eaten one, that's for sure.
It's North America's only native banana species, I think. And,
really?
It's truly a tropical tree, but it is native here, and it produces kind of a banana-like fruit. They don't don't picture a banana. It's kind of green and tastes a little bit like a banana custard type fruit, and produces large fruits that Deer will eat them, but the problem is possums and coons and everything else that can get them in the tree will get them first. They're highly desired by small mammals like that, and coyotes too will eat them. So a lot of stuff will eat them, hogs, deer will too, but they just don't often get the chance because they often get taken before they hit the dirt. So yeah, there's trees like that if it's native and it produces a fruit, I love it and like to grow it. My favorites, of course, are crab apples and persimmons, just because they are so consistent and deer love them. I mean, it is, if you can set up an orchard, and this raises another point that I learned over the years with my dad about hunting strategy and tree selection. And that is, one of the very first tips I'll give you about planting trees is put them in full sunlight. That is the fertilizer for any tree seedling you're going to grow. Don't put them in a forest where they're going to be shaded. They're not going to do anything. Don't plant them somewhere and leave them and let everything grow up around them. Keep them in the full sunlight. That's how they will grow a big, healthy crown and produce lots of fruit. Well, that's a good tip. But early on, my dad, my brother, and I, in our planting strategy, that's what we did. Anywhere there was a spot of sunlight, we put a tree there without really thinking about strategy. So now we've got a lot of trees strung out and scattered and with no real hunting pattern. So, or at least, you can hunt individual trees, but there's a lot of them everywhere. And I would advise people, if you're starting with a clean slate and you've picked the trees you want to grow, do some orchards that, just like food plots, they lay into a hunting strategy where you've got an easy access route to that site. The site is, small enough. Say if you want to bow hunt, then you want to put 5, 6, 7, 8 crab apples in a little spot that you can hunt effectively without it being so big you can't, deer can get in there and eat and get away from you. But that it's concentrated attraction in that one area. You want to do several of them, just like you want to have several food plots, several stand sites, but don't string them out and scatter them anywhere you got sunlight. Think about this. Think about where you'd like to have these orchards of the different species. Think about your infrastructure, like your roads and trails, and how you get around and where the ideal location is for these things. And then if you need to go cut some trees and make a place for these orchards, do that. Do it that way. You'll be a lot happier in the long run with your hunting strategy around those locations.
It's a good tip. I do a lot of these interviews pretty selfishly, so I've got a question. When do you see persimmons start to fall in the South usually? What time of year?
There's a little bit of variation, and you see this with any tree where there's always some individuals that buck the trend and will, drop a little early or hold late. And you can even get some persimmons that are improved varieties or foreign varieties that are really more for the fruit market and literally have to be hand-picked. They'll almost rot on the limb before they fall. You have to be careful about buying those. But with a native persimmon, what I see here is it's generally late October into November that most of them are falling. Sometimes you'll get one earlier. In general, the trend I see is crab apples are earlier. Crab apples are your September, October bow season source, and persimmons come in after that. Along about the same time as white oak acorns generally in this area. But when a good persimmon is falling, I think even that trumps even white oaks in my experience.
Man, Lindsay, you have been a wealth of information today, and I can't thank you enough for being willing to come on here and share with us how much you know, because this is one of those subjects that you could go on and on forever. I feel like we could talk to you for 5 or 6 hours, so I'm going to try to do our best to not keep you on the line. So,
hey, and I would willingly do it because I just love this stuff.
that's all. Well, in that case, let's keep going. No, I'm kidding. This is like what you live for and what you love to do, and you've made a career out of it, right, at the QDMA. So can you tell us a little bit about the QDMA and why it's such a great organization?
Well, it's, we have a vision for the future of deer and deer hunting, and it is that long-term deer herds are healthy, they are viable and sustainable, and that hunting is accepted by our culture, and that we're not in danger of losing hunters or hunting. And it's just, that's our vision for how we want things to be. And as a deer hunter, I live and breathe that vision. And so as a journalist coming to work here for QDMA and managing their magazine and website and all their communications is just right where I need to be. I've always wanted to be a writer and communicator, and I'm just a nut about deer hunting and deer management, habitat management, population management, the whole works. So, this is right where I fit in. And I think for any deer hunter, we certainly have the reputation of being the sort of an education group that will teach you how to do food plots, teach you whether you should take does or not, and if so, how many, which, how to age a buck on the hoof, things like that. And that certainly was where we were founded and was our bread and butter for many years, is education. But here in recent years, and you guys know, y'all, I was, by the way, very pleased to hear y'all have Nick Pinizzato on to talk about chronic wasting disease. But I'm not going to go there, but I'm just saying these concerns have come on here in recent years, hunter numbers, public land access, that really are a true threat to the future of deer hunting like we haven't seen before. And so, QDMA realizes, guys, if we're going to do this, we have to have a vision for the future that is what we want it to be for deer hunting, and that's what we're working towards. So I think any deer hunter who looks at what we do, our mission, and even our current 5-year mission goals that we have laid out for ourselves right now as measurable steps to take to attack some of these challenges, any deer hunter can look at this and say, that's a group I should be behind.
Sure, yeah. And Lindsay, I think I'm a believer. And I'll tell you this. There was a time when I was a skeptic of QDM because it felt like that it could be, kind of confused with just quality bucks. And that's not really what the QDMA is about at all. It's about a quality deer herd, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a perfect example of this myself because I'm from Southeast Georgia. Grew up there. That's where I hunt. And Southeast Georgia, this is the lower coastal plain. It's sandy soils, very similar to what y'all have in much of Texas. But in this area of Southeast Georgia, we're not going to grow bucks like are going to make, go viral on Facebook or make the cover of some magazine. We're just not going to do it. But can we have the best deer hunting we want to enjoy where we stand in our county? Can we produce some of the best deer in our county? And some of the best hunting experiences, yes, and we have done that. And that's what QDM is about to me, is not a certain class or quality of buck. It's about having the best deer hunting you can, best memories, best experiences, healthiest deer, and anybody can do that where they stand. It's not about big antlers. So I'm a great example of that and what it means to us, what it means to QDMA to practice quality deer management.
Yeah, Lindsay, I just totally agree with what you're saying, man. And if somebody was compelled and really felt moved to join the QDMA and be a part of this, what would be their best steps?
QDMA.com. It's full of information, of course, but at the top there's a join button. We are a nonprofit. This is what we do for a living. We don't profit from this, and we're also a 4-star charity as ranked by Charity Navigator, which is, the independent stamp of approval that tells you we spend your money wisely. We put it toward what we're going to tell you we're going to do for you. So, please go support us, learn from us for free if you can, but support us if you can, become a member, and there's a lot of different membership levels and ways to engage with us. Once you're a member, you'll learn about all the other assets and ways for you to gain from your experience with QDMA.
Yes, sir. All right, well, we'll be sure and link to that down below in the show notes as well. And Lindsay, I'm just going to tell you again, man, thanks so much for coming on today and just sharing some of your knowledge with us.
Listen, I loved it, guys. And by the way, I just watched the Rock Trolls video.
Oh, yeah?
And that was awesome. What a great experience.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed that. And so you guys keep it up. Y'all are doing great work, and I'll be following you.
Yeah, we appreciate it. We do our best to be all-around outdoorsmen, so that's kind of one of those things for us. But, yeah, thanks again, Lindsay, and thanks for the support, man. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Take care.
All right, we'll see you.
Well, I've got a lot to learn. I will say that.
Yeah, I'm about to go buy a couple tree books, and I believe they actually have an online library that you can purchase stuff like that from on QDMA's website.
Yep, I think you're right. Yeah. And I am feeling like a doofus right now because you know a lot about these kind of things, and I'm a late bloomer as far as learning about trees and flowers and birds and stuff like that probably. So I just felt like a big old dummy.
Well, I couldn't get out the word board arc, so there's that. Which I don't use the other two terms for them ever.
Boys the arc.
Boys the arcs, yeah, that's what I call them.
So remember the subscription and Rock Trolls comment giveaways that are about to happen. So make sure you go do that really quickly because we're not going to give a whole lot of time for that. Maybe a week, maybe two. We'll see. But go do that quickly. And then also, we wanted to, I guess this was not something that Lindsay asked us to do, but we're going to go ahead and say you need to be at the QDMA convention at the end of July. That's July 19th through the 22nd of this year. And there's some special stuff happening.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've never been in the past, but I always keep up with the convention when it's going on, and all the cool seminars and events that they have. There's a ton to learn. Like if you thought that what you learned from Lindsay today was awesome, think about that times 4 days. Yeah, with a bunch of food and a bunch of good times, and you know, meeting cool people who also care about whitetails like we do, and not just whitetails, but just wildlife in general. Mm-hmm. And then also, if you're one of the first 300 people who actually register for the event, you get a 1-year free premium membership to Onyx Services. So all 50 states, I can let you know from experience that the premium membership is awesome.
It's rocking.
It's the coolest thing. If you want to find a way to just search all the public land in New Jersey, you can. Even though you'll never go there, like it's so, and maybe it's because of who I am, but I love being on maps and looking at maps. So it's been so addicting and probably the greatest waste of time that I've ever had. It's actually not a waste of time at all. It's a good tool, and I think it's going to help us be successful this season.
Oh yeah, well it feels like a waste of time, I'm sure, at times when you're doing this, but like in the end, when you come full circle back to me and you're like, and I'm like, oh, you learned this much stuff in the last 2 days, you know, whatever. And then all of a sudden we put it all together and go kill a deer on public land out of state, you know, like it's actually not a waste of time. Every little thing that you learn there, you're learning little things that can get us into pretty cool situations.
Yeah.
So. So go do that. The link is below in the show notes if you want to register for the convention, and it is in Nollins. It's going to be good food, good times, good people, and I think we're going to be there. We're going to do our best.
Yeah, we're planning on being there. Things can always come up whenever you're working fellows like we are and family men, but the plan is to be there. So if you're there and you see us, come shake our hand. Don't yell at us or tell us we're doofuses like we can be sometimes. But anyways, we'd like to see y'all there.
That's right. We'll see you there. And one more thing. I'm going to go ahead and say this. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can go right now and you can give us a review, a 5-star review. If you just want to press the 5th star there and give us 5 stars, you can do that, or you can make a comment. Either way, I would appreciate that tremendously. Hope you guys have a great week. God bless. And remember, this is your element.
Living it.
Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Art Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.